Okay, so we want to welcome every location from wherever you are. Wherever you're joining us, you are so welcome. And if you're just listening to this, perhaps watching TV, perhaps you're, listening to a podcast, I believe that you've come to the right place. In fact, I believe that this word is specially designed for you. And as you listen to it and press into it, I think you're going to say, wow, this was a word that I needed to hear. I believe it's going to be relevant to the generation that we're in. And in fact, I want to introduce it because it's called regeneration, which really is all about not just the next generation, but it's about our current generation. Because if we don't sort of make the right decisions in our generation, we're not going to set up the next generation. And so it's really about, thinking across the generations. And I'm going to show you how this is important because this is something God has asked his people to think about. So we're going to go on a course over the next few weeks looking into the generations. And this for us in the UK is summertime. Normally we sort of, perhaps try and have a little bit of a pullback because it's holiday time. Instead, I believe we're doing a real significant series. And it's funny how that just worked out that way. So please, can we be pressing in every location and really sort of saying, God, what are you saying to me? And you might not have children right now. You might not even be married. Maybe you're part of our student sort of group, our Zeal guys. You might be part of that. Don't switch off. If I could have heard what I'm about to share with you, this is like me sort of, looking back to my younger self and saying, you just need to realize these things. Don't leave it too late. I want you to pick up on what God is saying here. So first of all, I want to introduce you to, it's like a little bit of perhaps research. I'm going to try and do it really quickly and effectively and talk about generations. Now, Generation X. I know some of you won't know what this is. And if you're in Asia or Africa, you might not quite it might not be quite as relevant, but you will get the principle of what I'm talking about. And this is perhaps more a Western sort of, analysis definition, but you'll see, just stay with me, you're going to see where we're going. So Generation X is my generation. So if you're around that, Generation X, that's why it looks so cool. It's like X-Men. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what a cool generation to be part of. Generation X. And if you were born around this sort of generation, there's a sort of little bit of a catchphrase with it. You're the latchkey kids. That's what you're known as. Isn't that funny? It's actually known as I'm a latchkey kid. What is that? What it means is we were the first generation to return home after school to an empty house as young children. Because the previous generation, my parents, they found this new independence and freedom. And from it, women went out to work more and more. And because of it, it meant both mum and dad would go out to work. And so my generation, the X generation, were some of the first to come home to an empty house. So I had my own key. That's what was called the latchkey kid. And I might have been 7 years old, 8 years old. I would go home. Now, it was fine in the summer, but when winter came, it freaked me out. Because when you're the only person at home, and, it's dark, I spent a long time hiding behind the sofa. Which is funny, but I'll tell you what, it impacted me. And so I just wanted us to start thinking about the environment that all of us were born into. So this Generation X, the latchkey kids. Also, there was more divorce than ever before started. So then you had single parents that had to go out to work, and that's why the children were also at home. Also, from it meant that you had to take care of yourself. So I remember, that my mother would say, hey, you can sort things out for yourself. I remember where the frozen pizzas were. And that was tea. Tin of beans, frozen pizza. That was the regular thing. And so you'd have a pack of 10. And they were about this big. And I don't know what was in there. You put it in the microwave. And this was your tea. And this was normal. I'd never heard of free range. I'd never heard of gluten-free. Just think about where we've come. I remember as I was when we were first married, that whole thing about, hey, there's E's in your food. I was thinking, what are E's? And then you suddenly realize you've been eating all this terrible stuff, preservatives. Today, just think how the whole of our generation has shifted today to this, all the different foods, the health, nutritional values. What a shift. So, Generation X, because of the economy and the way things were, they become a very independent generation. So if you study it, you will find that a lot of people who grew up as Generation X are very independent, which can be good and bad. And with that as well, they became cautious and known to be quite cynical, which means I've had to, growing up, just be careful about not being cynical about things I see in life, because of the background of my generation that had, it was really caused by where I was coming from and what I landed into. And all of this meant that I tried to be self-reliant. So from a very young age, I could iron, clean, cook. Yeah, some of you mums are going, wow, that is awesome. And there was this self-dependence, but also a view, don't think too positively. Things could go wrong. And it's just amazing how that generation, I'm generalizing here, but you can just see as they studied it, you will see these things, they come through. And every generation has a similar one. So my children now, they're known as the millennials. And I know I'm speaking to millennials right now. So we're going to switch straight into where we are now, millennials. But when I talk about the millennials, I don't want you to feel defensive. But there are words thrown around like millennials that they're very self-centric. That they sort of want things now. And we can go on and on with what that is. But I want you just to realize that where the millennials are today, where you are today, is because of my generation, Generation X. Because you didn't create that culture. Actually, the generation before began creating that culture. And that came from an impact from my parents. And right now, what I've done is I've landed in this world where we're raising our children as millennials, and we raise them into this world that we have the impact of them on. So a big sort of challenge around this is this thing of instant gratification that we all have. It's not just millennials, it's all of us now, because we're in it. I might be the X generation, but right now I am in this season where we're seeing the millennials and everything happening. And there are many wonderful, amazing things. But one of the things to do with the internet and social media is this instant gratification. So where we've seen such progress more than ever before, because you think 150 years ago, you basically, one generation was similar to the next, But we've seen this huge shift where each generation is changing with technology and how it impacts us. You guys, stick with me, because you've got to understand how this, I'm getting to the Bible bit, okay? But you stay with me. This has a relevant impact upon our lives. And this inner gratification, you just think about it. If I just need something, I can do it here, hopefully not in church this morning, but I can I don't know, I just need that puncture repair kit so I can fix things. And do you know what? If I get the super duper fast delivery, it could even come from the sky. It's like, do you know what I mean? It comes in on a little drone and gets delivered to me. It's like, we're at an age where you don't have to, and if you wait more than a day, you're thinking, where the heck is it? Something's gone wrong. We run out of coffee, and Heather will say, you need to order the coffee. I'm on it, and I'll tell you what, next, it's there. It's on our doorstep. The type I want, the color I want, the flavor I want, and also what Heather wants. It's all there. It's all there. All the different systems. What about, see, I actually used to come to this place to watch films when it was a cinema. And we used to come in, and it was a Saturday morning, it was the matinee, and we used to come in, and someone had a little piano at the front, and they would play God Save the Queen, and we'd all stand, and bring it back. and then you'd have like Flash Gordon in black and white. You couldn't come in and say, which cinema do I want? Do I want 3D? Do I want... It's like, hey, you're going to have what you're given. You're just glad there's a movie. Because at home we only got 3 channels. And yet now you can go to Netflix. You don't have to go anywhere. You can go through all of this instant gratification of what's available online. And if you really feel like it, you can even binge watch. And all of this, you see, has an impact not only on our millennials, if you're a millennial, but on us as well. Currently, right now, there's this, we need things now. So what happens is those that are growing up in it struggle to understand process. They want to see results. And what happens is when you go through process, there's something that you learn about character, something that you learn that you have to achieve. Let's just talk about dating. When I dated, I mean, I had to actually get in the same room as the girl that I fancied asking out. And when I saw Heather, it took me a few weeks, but I finally got the nerve up, and I'm there working towards this quiet moment in the room as she glided by. And I knew this was my one moment. And I remember there she goes, and I sort of cornered her. And then I said, I fancy going out. She said, what do you say? You go out with me? I said, sorry, I can't. I mumbled because I didn't have any confidence. So she asked me about 3 times, what are you saying? I wonder if you want to come out with me. And there was that awkwardness. We didn't have phones. Actually, in fact, when we were going out, we wrote to each other, with a pen and paper. And then if Heather wanted to speak to me, she had to walk a mile to the phone box. It's those red things that you see as And that's how we dated. But today, we've got dating sites. And, you can be whoever you want on there. You can sort of build a profile that actually isn't really you because you just want to get that swipe. Those of you who don't know, there's a swipe to the right is good, swipe to the left is bad. And in fact, I was having a look through and I found this guy. Joseph Mons. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Now, this is our youth pastor. And I want to just say to you, he really does put the stud in Bible study. And this is a swipe right guy. And no awkwardness. No worrying about saying those first words. He's got it all up there. He's done it all for him, whether it's true or not. And we... So you enjoy that. Have you calmed down now? Have you calmed down? It's very interesting because I heard a report this week about online dating, and they were trying to do the benefits and the positives, and then against all the negatives, and they're finding more and more that there's far more negatives than positives because of the pressure that's being built, because of the amount of people that are putting themselves forward because they're struggling to meet someone like we used to meet someone, and because of that lack of patience, right, which comes from the self-indulgence, is instead of putting myself up there in front of maybe a few people I might meet, let me put myself up there in front of the thousands that I'll never meet. And let me go through a list. And this one young man was just going through the whole list of things that he kept adding to his profile to get people to basically, I'm still not working, it's still not working, to the point of adding pressure and anxiety. And this is what they're all saying. I became anxious because I wasn't the person that people were looking for. So it's okay to have some fun and laugh, but you can just see how impacting. This isn't normal for many people. There are so many of these websites that come and impact people and through it cause some terrible depression. We're also in a world right now where depression is very common to talk about, and I know it's one of the first things they often ask you if you're struggling with stress and stuff. Again, when I was young, no one ever mentioned the word depression. I'm not saying it wasn't there, but I just think that in the world that we're in and the generation that we're in right now, because of the immense pressure and of what is going on in our world, this instant gratification, which removes patience, which doesn't build character, what it does is it breeds almost like artificial relationships. And we know through social media, the whole thing of just finding people that we're like is a massive pressure. So we are a product of our parents' generation. That's good and bad. So I want you to realize there are things that we need to honor and say, I'm so thankful that I had parents that chose to follow Christ and set me on a course. I'm so proud of that they gave me a head start in that. But also, I'm sure they would say to me as well, I know that there were things that you had to work through and fight through because we passed them on to you. And this is where I'm going, especially next week. Don't just grab this week. Next week, I'm going to be speaking more about this, about what we're leaving for the next generation, things that we should have dealt with that we never dealt with. And so we are a product. You're a product. We hear all the time, in all the years of pastoring, counseling, and the stuff we've done, we've heard all the time where people will say, you get down to, why are you struggling through this thing in your life? And it will often come back to, well, it was because my upbringing, my mother, father, or lack of mother or father, all these things. So it's just realizing that we are a product of our parents' generation. Now turn that around. It means those of us that are parents have got to realize, what are we producing? It doesn't just work one way, it works the other way. We can't change what's been, but we can certainly change where we're going, where we are. And that's what this series is about, is saying, do you know what? It has an impact. When we're young, like very young, the only approval that we need in our life is our parents, or those that are guardians over us. But as we go through adolescence, it changes through that approval looking towards our peers. And so if we as parents don't realize, especially in this world that we're in, that there is this massive pressure to be liked and acceptable within a certain peers group, if we don't realize that as parents, as guardians, we're going to be looking in the wrong place, a place that breeds anxiety and depression because we can never quite get to that place. And so there's a huge call out to parents here. We are a product of our parents' generation, both good and bad. I think when Heather and I were raising our 5 boys, there was something that I learned as I was growing as a parent, was that what we put into our kids today takes 7 years to really come out. And that really impacted me, because it's almost like when you see a bit of a behavioral issue, you tend to think, right, let's deal with it now. But if you've spent the last 7 years building something and you suddenly think, what the heck, what's wrong with this boy? And you don't realize that it's from the decisions from very early on. And, I'm trying to encourage parents here. Let's be wise and be aware of the way that we're raising our kids. The way that we are as mum and dad, the way that we love one another impacts a 1-year-old. You have to wait till they're 13 to work out what's going on. The way that we honor one another in our household impacts our children. The way that we talk about a passionate love for Jesus will impact the way your children are raised and the way they love Jesus. Just saying, oh, well, we don't need to talk about that and we go to church. No, the culture and the environment that you set, it will impact the next generation. And when I start thinking about the years beforehand that you've got to prepare for this, I just feel like God is saying, come on, wake up to love. What love? We know that if children grow up in love and affirmation, it's a powerful thing. But if they grow up in false affirmation, you got another problem. Because we also have been in a world where, do you know what now? Whatever you want to be, you can be. Which isn't entirely true. We want our kids to have big dreams and we want them to be who they're called to be. But if someone cannot sing a note in tune, don't tell them to go on the local talent show and say you're the best singer ever because I'm your mother. It's going to be embarrassing for them. And we have people who are deluded because they were told so long that you are the best. You're special. Right? And it's shifted the other way, because when I was young, if I said I'm special, it would be, don't think you're special. Your parents wouldn't let you think you were special. It's like, it's going to your head. Today, it's like, you're special. I love yourself. And against some of these things, in the right balance, are true about learning to love ourselves and these other things. But when we just think, hey, I'll just do anything I want to, it breeds an arrogance, and also it disempowers people. You know, when you go in the school races today, we know there's not really a first. You can have you can be sixth winner. I never won. But it taught me about hard work. If there's no losers, you don't understand about hard work. And if you're going to take sixth place and you're a winner, you're going to feel like you're a fraud. It will take more than a little badge to say, hey, aren't you great? You came sixth and you're like a winner. It's like, no, I'm not. You see how because we've got to nurture and be careful. So we need to be aware of these influences in this generation. And we need, as parents, to promote trust, to teach them trust, to teach them what endurance means. That you might not always be able to have what you want when you want it. To teach them how to have a real conversation. That we set an example where our phones on the dining table, when we're having dinner with our children, what for? What is that for? But we're teaching that this is a reliance that we need, that we have, and we're creating culture, and this is a generational influence, a current that is running right through, and we're jumping in on it. And I said to you, this isn't about blaming millennials, because, in fact, Generation X, my generation, are the ones, they were the minds that came up with Google, Amazon, and YouTube. So my generation created what we're now in. So for us to think, oh, the generation of today, not like when I was a kid. No, we created that. And so I'm trying to now speak back to that and say, what are we going to build right now? It's too late to wait till we're in front and then say, what the heck were we doing? We need to, as the church and as Christian parents, and even if you're listening to this and you don't have a faith, there is something for you in this. There's something about you building great young people, building children for the future. And I think every parent wants that. Kids with character, kids that are not influenced by likes and dislikes, but they find out who they really are. And that identity comes through who are the guardians of them. So it would be a lie to think that the decisions that I make today are independent of those that come after me. We need to realize that. So my decisions that I make around the way that I speak to my wife, around the decisions I make around finance and debt, the decisions that I make about how we're going to set the culture in our home, how are we going to talk about others, or who's going to believe the best, or are we going to have a cynical, critical edge? It would be a lie to think that my adultery will not impact the next generation. Well, I had a blip. I want us to realize, because we so easily smooth things off. We're in this generation, and Christians, sometimes we're good at this. It's like, hey, don't worry about that. Now, I believe God has an answer for it. I believe that God's a redeemer. But if we just think that we can behave how we want independently of how it's going to impact our children, we've got another thing coming. So that is a challenge to say, let's be wise about the way that we think. Let's teach them what godly wisdom is. But let's do it by living as an example. How do you show kindness to your children? How do show patience, gratitude. It's massive. So we're going to look at the Bible now in case you're worried. Here we go. Exodus 3, verse 5 to 6. It says, do not come any closer. This is God speaking to Moses. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Remember this bit? Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. This is the first time that we see in Scripture that God refers generationally. He's not just speaking to Moses, he's speaking to the generations. See, God has this view where he speaks. He's speaking, hey, I'm not just your God, but I'm the God of your father, and I'm the God of Abraham, I'm the God of Isaac, I'm the God of Jacob. And you've got these three generations that he mentions, and it's really important because he's speaking something to us about the relevance of three generations. So there's a pattern of behavior that you can create within three generations that once you establish it, becomes resilient. It takes on permanence for good or for bad. So you think back about, oh yeah, well that happened to my parents, and actually my dad said that's because his dad was like that. And in fact, we got a bit of a thing that runs through the family because that divorce thing carried on from one generation to another generation to another. That alcohol issue and addiction ran from one generation to another to another. And what God is saying here is there's three generations. You give me three generations that obey me and follow me, that find a place to actually sort of say, we're putting you first, God. We're going to build your house first. We're going to build your house first. And as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. But do you know what? The devil isn't really that bothered if you're a one flash wonder. A one-generation wonder. You can, be the greatest, reacher of people impacting this world in one generation. If you don't pass it to your children, to the next generation, right, it won't stick. There's no stickability. It'll be like, who was that came? Can't really remember much about, they did a few things, didn't they? But when you get it sticking to the second generation, that's when the enemy gets worried. That's why the enemy is interested in robbing the seed of the next generation. That's why there is a contention and a battle. And maybe I'm speaking to some parents that are going through something right now where it just feels like your child, your teenager, maybe your grown-up child is like just walking away from God or in a place that are making bad choices, because you've got to know that there is a battle for your seed. Because once you pursue and you press in and you battle, we've got to realize this is a cosmic battle. It's not just like, we're having a few issues here because of, social media, self-harm, etc., etc. You got to realize there's a big cosmic battle going on here. 7 years before, we're building into our children these things. And as you start looking at that, you start seeing how we need to set them up to win, set them up. But God wants to see this resilience come, and it comes through the pattern of generational thinking. It's challenging, isn't it? So we could safely say that God responds generationally. When he speaks to Moses, he's not speaking just to Moses. He doesn't just see your generation. So even with us here right now, on this day, he doesn't just see you. He actually sees the generations that are within you. And he sees the generations before. See, he thinks that's how he responds to us, is generationally. And that's why it's important that we don't disconnect. It's like our turn. This is our slot. This is our, we've arrived here on stage. Here we are. And it doesn't really have a big impact on what's coming next. It does. We've got to realize what we've picked up that isn't good. Realize what is good that we need to pick up and carry. And then we've got to decide what we're going to take into the next. With all of the environment and all of the sort of challenge of the environment and the culture of the generation we live in right now. But God is with us. He's with us. That's why I think we have certain nations around the world, particularly in some of our third world countries, where men abdicate responsibility as fathers. Because if you can get fathers not to step up into their responsibility, you break the line of a generational pattern. And if those men keep stepping away, maybe I'm speaking to one now, is if you sort of are just tempted to leave your wife or to leave your children, and maybe you're not even married, but you're going to walk away because it's easier for you just to look after yourself. It's easier for you to go and earn your money and find other women. It's easier for you to sort of live selfishly. You haven't thought that this is about the generations. There's something about the generations that will come. And that's why it's the greatest robber, because people don't understand what I'm saying, that God is a God of the generations. And if we just think this is about my world and my pressure and my challenge, and I'm struggling to support my family, so I'm going to walk. And the enemy's there saying, there's another generation that will surmount to nothing. And there's brokenness in the trail. And it's only when we get this turnaround, and especially men, God's men, that would actually step up in responsibility and set this culture and set this for those that are coming after us. So, my obedience today is my children's blessing tomorrow. It's not just about me doing something so I can get a blessing today. No, my obedience, the reason that I'm going to discipline myself, the reason I'm going to pursue God through this, the reason I'm going to show them that we will always trust God no matter what, is because my obedience today will be the blessing of my children tomorrow. It doesn't stop with me, you see. This is what God is saying. I think the challenge is it's coming through the generations, as in that negative stuff. But the positive thing is when I get it right, it flows through the generations. This is what he's talking about. So just this other scripture that I've got here is Genesis 22:15-18. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, Isaac, do you remember? Because of this, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. So we know that Abraham, he starts off basically no children, barren. There's this promise to say, I'm going to make your descendants like your seed. Yeah. But what does it come through? What does the blessing come through? It comes through obedience. Yeah. And so it says here, your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies. And through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. Because you have obeyed me. Because you have obeyed me. And he's speaking to Abraham here, and you will see that there is even Levi, who is like his great-grandson. Even Levi, what does it say? It talks about the blessing that comes to him because of what Abraham did. That means that what you do today and the hard decision you make today and the choice to follow God, the choice to maybe give when it's difficult, all these things, when you're obedient to what God has called you to do, it spills out and it floods out on the generation to come. This is for us as a church. It's not just with people with children. We've got to realize no matter what age you are, what generation you are, you're not out of this. You're in it right now. And there is something about what we're spilling into the next generation, what we're modeling for the next generation. And it says clearly, because of your obedience, I'm taking you from barrenness to fertility, to an abundance. All because obedience is the key. Obedience is the key. Whatever you're struggling with right now, obedience is the key. If you think that your marriage is over, you need to realize that he doesn't give up on it. Obedience is key. He's a God of restoration. God of restoration. It's not just we'll package that and put it off and carry on. So I'm going to try doing something now. We're coming towards the end, but I want to do this diagram that I made. I hope it makes sense. So this is how I want you to get the picture of this, okay? Here we go. These are 3 generations. So we've talked about 3 generations creating a pattern, a cyclical pattern, either of good or of bad. And so here they are. The boomers are my parents' generation. And the boomers, perhaps the baby boomers, they had this sort of, I suppose, hippie sort of burn the bra and all that sort of stuff. And they were like, they were liberal, and there was all this stuff. And so there was this big increase. They're just called the boomers, so don't worry about it. Kampala. Boomers. It's a great name, isn't it? Boomers. So that was my parents. They were the boomers. And so Generation X came out of that. So we were being built out of that, okay? And then the millennials come on top of this. But through it all, you've got to realize there is this current, so a generational current that flows through from one to the other. And we can actually prolong that and build banks to gauge it through for bad or for good. And it will pass through. And that's why people talk about, oh yeah, my great-grandfather, and we looked in our roots here, and it's got this and that. Because if you're not intentional to break something that is damaging your family, the current will run through one generation to another, with all the complexities and challenge of the current generation. But if you get it right and you start saying, do you know what, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. Do you know, I'm not going to say to my kids when they get to that awkward age of saying, I don't want to go to church. And they sit there looking miserable. Well, we're a bit more like, you're special, aren't you? And we just want you to find your way and experience it for yourself. Because we don't want to force you, do we? So you stay at home while mum and dad go to church. You're making a big mistake, I'm telling you. Big mistake. There's somewhere in the middle, right? There's somewhere in the middle, which means you don't have to force children. See, if I'm leading my children, I'm saying this is what we're doing as a family. And I'm not going to make you worship. I'm not going to make you do things, but we're going to go, and this is something that is a priority. And as long as you live in my house, this is what we're doing. I'm saying to you that this is this current that runs through, because all of that time you're exposing them to one moment where the Holy Spirit drops revelation. Suddenly they understand, oh, this isn't just my parents' faith, this is a faith for me. But some of us haven't even got our kids in the place to be able to hear it, because we decided to vacate and get out there because we didn't like the confrontation at home, and we didn't like the atmosphere because it was awkward, and there were times in the bedroom, and there were times where we had to bring discipline because we just thought we may as well just give in. Don't give in, because this is the generation to come. Right? This is like a birthright. This is your inheritance. And I've seen too many parents just get into this wishy-washy stuff. More out of fear rather than out of conviction to lead. Leadership is what's missing. So once you get the current through, there's this other thing, and this is the great thing. All of this comes around this thing called choices. And this is the good news, is you can be in a generation that is rubbish. And I'm sure I'm speaking to some people that haven't had parents raise them. Maybe you were adopted, raised by your auntie. Maybe you were in a situation where, I don't know, you just did not have a good start. I know many people in the Bible. There was one called Legion, and he had so many spirits and demons. My guess is he didn't have a good family background. But when Jesus turns up, everything changes. Because when Jesus turns up, he didn't say, hey, you got a few issues. We need to check you into a health clinic or something and get you sorted out on a 52-week course of detox. He came and he says, no, I see the purpose and destiny in you. What he's doing is he's speaking to Legion about his future. He's saying, do you know what? Today's the time to make a choice. And I think as he brings deliverance, he's also encountering the Jesus that makes all things new. And so even if you're at a place where you're just thinking, yeah, well, I haven't had a good start. Look at it. It's absolutely, I've had a terrible beginning. But today you can make a choice. And all through this, some of us even have a great foundation and we make bad choices. I can't make my children make good choices. I'm going to set them up to do that. But all of us have choices. And this is the thing that stands out in the generation that we're in. This is the thing that changes it all. And what is it all for? It's because we're preparing the Alpha generation. The Alpha generation are our kids right now, our little kids, the kids that are being born. The Alpha generation, this is the rocket ship we're launching. This is what we have right now in front of us. When I look at that generation, your children now that are out and our kids that are sort of round and about in this generation, everything we do with this generational current that we're going to make sure it's a good generational current. We're going to make sure it's powerful. We're going to make good choices that make the difference. Why? Because we want to see our Alpha generation launch. They will go further than we ever went. And the choices that we make will decide whether they go far or fall short. You cannot separate the choices you are making right now with the way it's going to pour out as a blessing upon those that are to come. So the choices I make today impact the generations to come. That's right for every one of us, not just parents. You can be young people. You can be a teenager today. The choice you'll make today in being obedient to Jesus will take you this way or that way. You've got a choice to make. You've got a choice to make. Don't make the lesser choice. Don't sell yourself short. Hold out for God's best. Hold out for God's best. The choice I make about tithing, I just want to bring the reality of this, where God says, we're to bring the tithe, the full tithe, and the offerings into the house of God. It's not just, I don't really know if I agree with that, and I've got some opinions. I want to say that your lack of obedience will spill over upon the future generations to come. It's not just about, we've taken on this new mortgage and it's a bit tight. You have made your own house and you've caused a disadvantage to your children. But you think you've created a nicer home. But you've created a more difficult future. It's how you think, you see, generationally. So I am finishing up now. Just give me the last few minutes. It's a big subject to build. So I'm trying to get it all together. There's a picture of a cathedral. And you would have heard me talk about this years ago, cathedral thinking. I just want to deposit this for you. Cathedral thinking. What it means is when they went to build a cathedral, they would plant trees 80 years before they started building the cathedral. Why? So that they had trees to harvest for the timbers and in the roof and all the scaffold that they would build it with. It took like a forest. So 80 years before, they said, we're going to build a cathedral. And they would sow, you imagine putting in these saplings, 80 years before. I'm never ever going to see this tree cut and used into its final purpose. I'm never going to see it. But there's something that this generation understood about generational thinking that is not actually, it's about what I plant and what I sow, not about what I reap. But we've got involved, you see, through self-indulgence to I want to see an instant result now. But God is saying to his church, and he's saying to us at Freedom right now, that it's not about an instant result. It's about what you will sow for the generations to come. That means what will you put in the hard work for? What are you going to go out into the rain and the storm to dig and to sow? You won't benefit from it directly, but the generations to come will. And they'll say, who planted that tree that built the cathedral? It's called cathedral thinking. So the result is compounded obedience, time and time again, resulting generation to generation obedience results generational blessing. A blessing that flows. Many of us are enjoying the blessing because of the obedience of those that went before us. And it's flowing. God wants to increase it. And it's exponential. And it increases and it flows. And I personally want to make sure that when we check out, we're going to leave more for those that are coming than what we had. Do you know we have pastors around the world and we've got some churches around the world. We're struggling from week to week because we didn't have a resource to step into. The reason we didn't have that resource because we didn't have people who thought generationally before us. Because this faith's been going for 2,000 years, and if we were obedient, forefathers were obedient, we'd be stepping into an abundance, right? That there wouldn't be lack like we have. And so you can't change that. What I'm saying is we need to change it. We need to change the way that we leave more land, that we leave more finance, that we leave more opportunity, that we leave more vision, that we leave more wisdom for the generation that's coming. That means we got to think forward. We got to think generationally, and it's through compounded obedience. That's what we want to do. This changes everything. What are we going to leave? I want to hand over to all our locations right now, and I pray that God will bless this word to you. Don't forget to join us next week, where we're going to be looking at dealing with the giants in our generation.